Good evening and welcome to the Financial Review Committee meeting of August 25th, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call roll?
When your name is called, please answer with here or present. Member Frost?
Here.
Member Killebrew?
Here.
Member Vigzoric?
Here.
Vice Chair Federico?
Here.
Chair Orlando?
Here.
For the record, all members of the Financial Review Committee are present.
We will now move on to the public comments. There will be a 3-minute time limit per person and an overall time limit of 15 minutes for the public comments portion of the agenda. All comments are to be directed to the Financial Review Committee and shall not consist of any personal attacks. Members of the public are expected to maintain a professional, courteous decorum during the comments. State law prohibits the Financial Review Committee from taking action on specific items unless it appears on the posted agenda. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments at this time.
Okay. Then we will go ahead and move forward to new business. I would like to call item number 1, the approval of the minutes from June 18th, 2020 Financial Review Committee meeting. It's the recommended action to approve the minutes. Do I call for a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a vote?
Member Frost?
Aye.
Member Killebrew?
Aye.
Member Vigzoric?
Aye.
Vice Chair Federico?
Aye.
Chair Orlando?
Aye.
By consensus, this motion passes 5-0.
Great. On to the next item, fiscal year 21 general fund budget update. It's the recommended action that the Financial Review Committee receive and discuss the information provided. Do we have our staff reports?
Yes, I will provide the staff report. I've got a PowerPoint presentation in front of each of you. I apologize, I don't have a bunch of sheets with numbers on them, but I worked literally through the weekend. We were still getting some numbers in to accrue back to last year, and I kept solving an evolving issue. But what's before you tonight, I believe, is what I would be ready to take to the City Council next month, and I'll discuss the process ahead of you. Back in May, when we went to Council with adjustments to last year's fiscal year 20 budget, we had a discussion within the framework of the adopted financial policies that have been adopted the year prior to formulate our game plan for addressing the FY20 budget hit due to COVID. You'll recall that at that point in time, we were looking at a $4 million potential revenue hit just in FY20, and leaning forward into FY21, we were looking at a $6 million hit. So the first slide here, slide 1, kind of just gives the background of all the different components of what it is we're relying on providing some direction as we wind our way through this maze. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I do want to mention some of the important points that the council directed us to lean into and that we did with the FY20 budget solutions. And I've done, again, or I should say staff's done, putting together updates to FY21 is we kept our investment in our city infrastructure, our capital projects and facilities last year. And again, in all the proposals I'm putting together now and looking into the next 2-year budget that we'll be working on and bringing to council next spring through the FRC. Also decided when putting our game plan together not to count the federal, state, and county emergency funding, the CARES Act and so forth, until we were certain that we were going to actually get it. Decisions coming from the federal government through the state and the county, they're tough to rely on with changing guidance constantly, but We're fairly confident. I'll talk about some of the funding that we do have available to us and that we've received some of, but some of which we're not going to be relying on until we actually get the money. We also, closing last year, we reduced a bunch of line items. The direction was to go after the line items, not necessarily wholesale programs. Minimize service reductions to the extent possible. Prioritize any use of city council designated funds. That's our pension money we set aside to work into investing for unfunded pension liabilities, and also for community investments, excess surpluses that we've had over the years that we put into an account, a community investment account, and it's for, kind of hopes and dreams. We've got a list of projects in the budget that aren't funded, but at some point the council decides on how to allocate the funds and whether or not to fund some of those projects. And then to utilize any reserves, that's our economic stability and emergency reserves in particular, with an expectation that you don't want to use your reserves in the first go around here because something else might happen. So, kind of balance everything. Slide 2. Again, I mentioned that the revenue hit just last year was estimated at 4.2 million. The council approved in amending the budget in early June a bunch of revenue and expenditure adjustments. They're all listed here. The bottom 3 bullets on this page talk about we utilized $1 million out of that community investment account I mentioned. It was at 5 million. We drew it down to 4. The set aside for pension liability was also at 5 million. We drew it down to 4, and the economic stability reserve was reduced to 3.4 from roughly 4.3 million. Slide 3. The solutions that occurred with the FY20 budget resulted in us actually finishing the year better than we had taken the dimmer view, if you will, a more conservative view back in May. We are actually able to finish the fiscal year with both revenue high, a little bit higher, and I'll talk to that, and expenditures lower to the point where we have an unassigned fund balance that it's considered per policy to be 100% funded if it's equal to 7% of operating revenues. We ended up finishing at over 10 million on that, to the good. Our economic stability reserve that we had drawn 935,000, we refilled that to close the year. So it was also at policy level finishing the year. We never touched the extreme event reserve. The Doheny Village Beautification Reserve was never touched, and it stands at 826,000. That community investment account is still at 4. It had been 5, and the unfunded liability reserve at 4 had been 5. The council approved us applying for any federal, state, and county relief we could get, with the intent that when we get that money back, that we look to replenish the economic stability reserve, solve our budget issues in the coming 2 years, this year and next, work toward replenishing the unfunded pension liability and the community investment account. So how did we finish last year? General fund revenues, we finished 900,000 better than the amended budget, which was obviously cut several million because of projected COVID impacts. Our hotel transient occupancy tax did finish 360,000 higher than our amended budget. So we ended up finishing stronger there, even though one of our resorts hasn't opened yet. And in my projections back in May, we had expected all of them to open to some extent in June with very limited occupancy. The ones that did open did better, and we had one that didn't open, the Marriott, but we still finished better. Sales tax with the relief that the governor provided by allowing businesses not to pay their quarterly sales tax when COVID hit. We have since still performed better than our lowered expectations. And we've closed out FY20 with a payment we just received last week from the state, and it was up 240,000 from our adjusted projections. We also went through and cleaned out. We get construction and demolition deposits from people coming in to do developments, where they have to pay us an amount of money that becomes a fine if they don't prove to us that they actually took the demolished materials from their construction to an approved facility that recycles. And we cleaned out. We usually carry this for a couple of years. It's a lot of work to go through all of them. And so we had probably some of the deposits dating back to fiscal year 17, and we just did a clean sweep. It's not uncommon for some local governments. I did this in my prior life in Long Beach. You kind of leave them there as a safety account. Anyway, so we cleaned those out and captured as revenue 382,000. Investment income came in better. We're usually very super conservative on investments. If there ever comes a year when we spend all of our capital money in that year, as opposed to what typically is multi-year projects, we were able to finish a little bit better on investment income. And then we did have a couple of grants that we budget all the revenue and all the expense when we get the grant, and it carries over. So we end up getting a reduction in our revenues when they don't come in, because it ends up being multi-year and we didn't spend the money. So it's not a bottom line impact, but we roll over both into the subsequent year, and those will be in the FY21 budget. Mostly they are planning grants. General fund expenditures finished 1.6 million under the amended budget. So every department has been, even with extra expenditures we had incurred because of COVID, every department is able to ratchet back. And again, our expenditure budgets are also fairly conservative and provide some flexibility for staff should emerging issues arise. Again, I mentioned our economic stability reserve was replenished to the policy level, and our unassigned fund balance finished 1.3 better than policy. And feel free, this is not just going to be a one-way conversation. If you have any questions, stop and ask. I'm fine with that.
I have a question on the sales tax. So I know that they still had to report their sales tax earnings. How are they doing?
So
How did they come out in the reports, even if they didn't pay? Because they
We-
have 12 months to pay.
yeah, there's
Over
a
the year?
couple of different, I think there was 2 different options that
Yeah.
businesses could do, either as a loan or
12 individual payments.
our reports show that quite a few businesses did take the deferral.
Mhm.
A lot of them paid. The bigger ones generally paid because they didn't qualify for the deferral. So we still have some that are out there. We're going to have some businesses that don't make it, and we'll never see that money, or it'll go into bankruptcy through a bankruptcy process. But we were estimating that we'd finish at 87% of what we had projected initially, and we ended up, I think, a little over 91%. I forget the percent, but we just got the number in last week. So we ended up doing better. Our sales tax consultant / auditor that we have under contract is typically very conservative. I went with their number, their updated number they gave us at the end of April, because we didn't know what anything was.
Right.
So I kind of had a suspicion that it would have been pretty conservative anyway. I'm pretty sure they don't like to go back to all their clients and say we were wrong in the wrong direction. So it did finish better though.
Great.
Madam Chair, if I could, I have a question before we leave this slide. So back to slide 4 real quick, if you guys, if we could. Mike, just, I'm assuming this same brief will kind of go to the city council if the committee here approves it with edits or whatever. Just to answer the question that some people might have, if general revenues were 900,000 better than the amended budget of 36.8, does that mean that amended revenues were 37.7? If I add 900 to 36.8.
Give me a second. $36,781,000.
So, right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So they ended up being 37, whatever. And then if general fund expenditures were 1.6 million less than the amended budget of 41.4, then they were 39.8. And so there's still a delta of $2.1 million, right, between revenues and expenses.
Yeah, I've got the reconciliation, so.
Yeah, right. I don't necessarily need the answer right now. I know you're going to kind of go through. You've already talked about like.
I believe in that expenditure calc
Mhm.
And the revenue calc, I netted out the grants and the carryover purchase orders because they really don't help us in the next year.
Mhm.
Because I'm going to show them as revenue and expense in FY21 when we amend the budget. So I know that's part of it, but
Okay.
I've got all the numbers. So these are
Someone
the
will ask
sheets
how
I
those
want to give
numbers
you.
are different, and if expenses are 2.1 greater than revenues, where did we lose? Which fund coughed up the other $2.1 million?
Give me a second.
You don't have to answer it now.
I want to.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
To balance out the whole problem you're talking about.
Yeah.
So we used the community investment account, the
And that's where we
the
balanced it out with
unfunded
those.
liability and the 935 that we replenished. So all the math works. It's just I've actually got sheets printed out I'll send to the committee.
So if I take all of the solutions from page 2 and kind of add that up, that's the delta, right?
The solutions amended the budget
They amended the budget.
and
So
filled
is
the
slide
hole.
4. Okay.
Yeah, what I could add to slide 4 would be the use of the unfunded liability, the use of the community investment account.
I think just to avoid that
That's
question, I know that it's all in this document. But I think just to avoid that question, and it becomes whole when you say, $1 million each from 2 different accounts, and then all that other stuff nets up to add up to the other 100,000, and that's how we were whole and had a balanced budget. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Mike, a quick question. So basically, since we sort of, I guess, overestimated, which is really good, does that give you any sense of potentially reanalyzing our $6 million for this year? Did that allow?
That's coming up I roll all that into going forward. So there's a future slide here.
Great. But very good for overestimating. I mean, this is a good slide. What is it, 5?
Don't get too excited.
Madam Chair, very quick. My one suggestion is to follow up on Mayor Pro Tem's question about on page 2 when it says what we use, for example, the economic stability reserve, 935,000, and then when you put later on that it was replenished to policy, just to, I don't know, make it more clear, what the policy is and how much time you had to do that, and how quickly we got it done. And so explain the policy, why we are replenishing that so quickly. That's all I have.
I've got a slide on that as well. Good point. Okay, starting, so kind of rolling out of fiscal year 20 and starting FY21 and updating all the projections. The first thing we did was to start the discussion was to set all the reserves to what they should be in FY '21, using the original adopted budget for '21, not our lowered revenue projections, because our reserves are set as percentages of operating revenue budgeted. So I didn't want to go and take advantage of the lower projected revenues and lower our reserves if this is a 1 or 2 year problem, because we'd have to rebuild those reserves. I'm trying to solve to keep the reserves where they should be normally, absent a pandemic. So we did start the year, we had to put additional money into those 2 reserves because our adopted operating revenue budget was higher in FY '21 than we had budgeted in FY '20. So we added about, between the 2 of them, about $85,000 immediately into those 2 accounts for this discussion. And then started solving from there. Update revenue projections, met with all the departments multiple times, scrubbed through everything. Not just revenue projections associated with COVID, but all of our revenues. So the way I've laid out the rest of this presentation is I'm going to have the next slides are based on the numbers here that 1 through 6 that talk about the proposed amendments to the FY '21 budget. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to read through all of these. These are the coming slides if you wanted to see a summary, but I'm just going to go ahead and flip to slide 6. The first thing I'm recommending is that excess fund balance unassigned fund balance that we finished FY '20 with, I said we finished it higher than policy. It's higher than policy by 1.3 million. When I look at the financial policies 233 and 234 and work through their interaction with how to deal with that excess fund balance, in a normal time, that surplus from the prior year would get rolled into the community investment account, put over into the capital fund for that hopes and dreams wish list of projects. I'm recommending, given what we're going through right now, that I want to recommend to the city council that we waive that policy requirement at this point in time and utilize the 1.3 to help us solve our problem in FY '21. And I'll talk about the problem in a minute. The community investment account, again, per the second bullet here, just talks to what that community investment account could be used for. The policy was actually discussed and set up with language that if we get down the road and we need it to help out a one-time problem, we can do that. Yes, it's hoped that it would go toward new capital projects. Talks about doing studies or even holding community events, or to reduce long-term liabilities. That it really is a reserve with the hope that it goes toward capital improvements, but it could be the council decided they didn't want to lock it down to just that it could be something used for other issues, for instance, response to a pandemic. So I'm just, the last bullet here is I'm recommending that we waive the policy requirement to move it over there and then make another recommendation to move it back. So that's number 1. Number 2, talking about the revenue hit. So back in May, when I put the projection together and I said $6 million, that number's actually grown to about 7.1. So even with the better than expected hotel performance, May and June, even April, because we still had some hotels operating, we work with the hotels and actually have a call with them every week. And we're talking to them about the issues they're facing, how they're adapting. And one of the big area, and I'm going to talk about actually on our last slide where I talk about risks, is groups that come and stay at our hotels and conduct their meetings and their business, is the sector of their business that has the least good news about. The state guidelines have hampered their ability to have group business because they're not allowed to have gatherings. They've been creative, safely creative, to be able to provide for groups, some weddings and so forth. But you've got a lot of businesses and industries that they aren't going to be able to accommodate and are backing out, plus the economy itself. You'll see that when the economy starts going down and businesses are being impacted, the travel and meetings expenditure lines in their budgets get trimmed. So we're hoping that at some point the state comes up with some guidelines that allows them to manage their businesses. But right now they're handcuffed pretty bad, and they're seeing a lot of group bookings, cancellations. So we lowered another $1 million. So literally dropping our TOT projection to this year down to right up 50% of what we had expected. Thankfully, the trend line we had been on was that we generate about 13.6 million of hotel TOT this year. COVID hit, and now I'm dropping it, but I'd only budgeted at 12.875 million. So we had about $750,000 built in there as a just in case. Obviously, nowhere near enough for this, but we're dropping the hotel TOT down significantly. With that, we've also got a reduction in sales tax because they're also our largest sales tax producers. We do also have a reduction in short-term rental TOT. That one might actually have some better news because I'm hearing anecdotally and that industry is actually benefiting a little bit from the hotels and just the entire, the concerns regarding COVID, that we dropped it $250,000, so almost 30% from what we had expected, but that might actually perform better. So we did better than what I've got in there right now this year by about 30 grand, and I'm hoping next year at least comes in at this level. Our property related taxes, this is property tax, property transfer tax, and in lieu property taxes are doing really well. One shining star for us is the property transfer tax. Every time a property sells, there is a fee assessed, and the city and the county split it. And we just saw, I think it's our largest August property transfer tax remittance that we got from the county last week. And it turns out that the Monarch Bay housing area is firing on all cylinders because the underlying land used to be mostly leased, long-term leases, and they had favorable terms at the end of the lease for the lessees to buy the land at 60% of market value. So we've got a lot of folks that are buying the dirt underneath their houses that they own. They own the structure, but not the dirt. So we kind of expect this I knew this, 10 years ago when I learned that this was going to happen. I figured there was going to be quite a bit of turnover. It's actually starting to happen. So I think this one will be a positive one, and it's over 200,000 of the increase, might be 250 of that increase in that property related taxes is related to that line item. And then licenses and permits, and also some of our charges for services related to development. It's still rocking and rolling. We're still getting a ton of development projects coming through, construction projects, remodels, you name it. A lot of it also because of Monarch Bay. Now that people own the dirt, they're also improving the structures that they weren't probably willing to put any money in because they didn't own the dirt. So we're able to get a lot more comfortable raising our projections on license and permits and charges for services. Our investment income also, even with dwindling TOT and sales tax revenues, our investment income budget has traditionally been really low. So I'm very comfortable that we'll hit that number. I did book the CARES Act monies. We've got 300 through the county allocation and 400 through the state. We received the county, and the state's process is set up, and I'm very confident that we'll be able to collect it. So the certainty was there enough for me to put it in the budget. Robin here is working diligently to get through the the meat grinder that is submitting for those state monies, but also putting together the packages of all the expenditures information for what we've spent on the county. We've also submitted for FEMA reimbursements, which I believe we're going to get, but I'm not as confident there. So we might have a couple $100,000 that we should be able to get from FEMA, which will free up money we would otherwise use, or expenditures we'd otherwise charge to CARES Act, so we can charge more to CARES Act. So I did not book the FEMA money, but the CARES Act is in there. I mentioned the carryover grant. So we do have a sea level rise, and what's the other grant? The housing element. Lantern District impact fee. I had put $250,000 in the budget, figuring one of these projects was going to happen. It's probably still going to happen, but the reality is I should have never put it in there. It's money per council policy. As soon as we collect it, we move it over to the Doheny Village Improvement Account in the capital fund. So I should have never even, I should just budget this when it comes in, and that's what we'll do. So I'm just removing it from the budget so that it makes our bottom line a little bit more true for what we're really trying to solve for. The gas tax transfer was, we had concern that in some out years here, we might have some audit issues regarding, they've got what's called a maintenance of effort requirement for maintaining our streets, where you have to spend so much on eligible expenditures you have to incur using your general fund money in order to qualify to use gas tax money for maintenance. And last year, seeing that on the horizon, we simply, given that we're fully funding our capital program every year from the general fund, I removed the transfer into the general fund and lowered the transfer out of the general fund to the capital fund. So it was a wash to the capital fund and it was a wash to the general fund. And so I'm just showing this here because it was one of the reductions to our proposed revenues. Charges for services I talked about, that relates to licenses and permits and development. And then all of our other revenues, overall, I'm bumping 46,000. There's probably 30 line items. So overall, the revenue projection did decrease 5.9 million net. But if you just add those first three lines, you get over 7 million now that I'm projecting because of COVID. Slide 8, I mentioned carryovers, so that we didn't spend the money last fiscal year. We're going to be spending it this year for these various elements. So I just wanted to show them as we will be adjusting the budget. We typically do roll over multi-year contracts. We encumber them the first year, basically tie up fund balance. We don't spend it all. Fund balance is still there. We carry the expenditure over to the next year and it eats it up the next year. That's what this list does. Slide 9, personnel costs. From the adopted budget, recommending over $750,000 in budget reductions, in leaving some positions vacant, my old position, my assistant position, and I'll talk a little bit about what we've been doing to cover workloads. Our economic development management analyst left earlier or last year. We haven't filled that position. We've got a maintenance worker that it gave notice and it'll be leaving in another week or two. So we're going to run with that vacant. We've got a retirement coming up here from one of our staff members. So just talking about vacancies and workloads, we've been heavily cross-training since COVID hit, repurposing. I'm actually jumping kind of the last bullet too. Repurposing some of our recreation staff to help out in other areas. At first, it was to backfill where folks went home because of COVID, because of either age, underlying health conditions, childcare, or somebody in their home that had underlying health conditions. Well, we still had to have certain positions filled here. We were bringing staff in from other areas to backfill. That created some opportunities as I look at like the vacancies for the senior administrative assistant, administrative services. We were able to repurpose a administrative assistant in the recreation program, and they're filling this role. We're leaving that one vacant. Recreation programs are for the most part shut down, even though we're going to be doing some and have been doing some, but they're kind of pulling double duty and cross training, and it's continuing. I've eliminated in the proposed budget, the budgeted raises for staff this year, and also staff does accrue paid time off, and the city has, staff typically have the ability to cash out accrued time off within certain conditions, and we put the clamps on that when the budget issues were obviously apparent back in April, May, and we're going to continue with that, except under some emergency conditions that might occur to one of our staff members. So there'll be a case-by-case discussion. I'm leaving some money in the budget for those cash outs, but they will be managed to a limited number. So overall on personnel costs, $750,000. Oh, and by the way, the assistant city manager, administrative service director position that's vacant. I'm handling the finance part of that. Kelly's handling a lot of it. Our HR manager's not here. She's tackling some. Jamie's stepping up, Robin's stepping up. So we're just pushing more workload down to other staff, cross-training them. But when you go into the administrative services wing over here, there's a lot of empty offices, but we're somehow managing it. So, all right. Slide 10 here, just a summary of some of the bigger line item reductions in the proposal. The sheriff's contract, I mentioned this back in May. The base contract that we got and took to council in May for this fiscal year was about 600 and I want to say 80,000 less than what we had budgeted for a number of reasons, but it was obvious that the county itself recognized the issue with the charges they get in their general fund and their unincorporated areas for policing, that they kind of clean some stuff up. I don't know if this is a continuing good thing or if it's going to hit us again next year. It's really hard to get your head around some of the county's numbers and their processes for allocating costs, but it looked to me like they were leaving. They've got special funds to deal with employee benefits and insurance and workers' comp, facilities. I'm missing one big one, IT. So they've got these other funds that they collect money into and manage those functions for the county, and they have charges out to all the departments. So it's pretty sure, and this was something I did back in Long Beach when we had major budget problems, was they will bleed down some of the accumulated funds in those other funds by not charging for a period of time out to all the departments. So I think I definitely know that we're benefiting from some of that. And then there's also some special event savings, since we're not having a lot of special events that we charge, some of the music festivals and stuff. We're able to cut some of that out. I also cut the revenue on it though. Street maintenance, and did you give out that extra slide? Yeah, this is a slide where I thought some more information might be wanted from the group. So street maintenance, in our contract with the county, we reduced the contract by one employee. Matt and his crew have been reworking who's doing what, and in order to achieve these savings. And also we had a contract to do the Caltrans right away from the freeway to by the Doubletree. That whole section of what most people think of as Coast Highway is Caltrans. And we've paid for probably over a decade a special contract to adopt the highway. And Matt's managing that differently to still keep it clean, but to have some savings. And a bunch of other little things in our streets program. Total 193,000. Under contract, where am I at here? Oh, contracts, traffic engineering, consulting work. Again, Matt's utilizing less hours through contract and absorbing the work in-house in other ways. However, he's getting it done, he gets it done. Under the safety lighting line item, $50,000 of savings has to do with absorbing some. We've got a camera network around town, some of the maintenance and management of that system. We're absorbing it into our IT contract, our IT budget. It had historically been in Matt's budget, but we're figuring out how to get everything done and save some money. Park maintenance, $180K. This is a combination of a few different things. On our most recent renewal of our contract for landscaping and park maintenance and median maintenance, we had added some scope of work in there that involved additional laborers and irrigation technicians and other things, and we're dialing those back for the time being. We actually started it back in May, so we haven't seen a great degradation in the quality of our parks or medians in particular. So we're running with that. And also a big number in there is sports field maintenance. We've had a contract to maintain our sports fields. We got to dial it back for quite a while because we don't have, the number of like little league games and softball games and other stuff. We still have some maintenance level there. And we're also going to be working with Dana Point Youth Baseball, who's our biggest client here, to get them. We're providing them with some tools that they can start helping to do some of the maintenance, raking and so forth, smoothing out the dirt. But we still have to provide some level of maintenance just to keep it safe and nice. So there are some savings in there. I already talked about the landscape medians. That's actually part of the park maintenance reductions. They kind of go together with the contractor we have. The tree maintenance reduction, we're balancing out the trimming cycle from roughly depends on the type of tree and location and everything else, but we're doing, if you were to drive by Sea Canyon Park, we're doing a heavier trim, if you will. We haven't received one complaint, so we won't have to trim that park again for a while. So we're kind of rolling through doing more of a trim, but over time there will be less per year. So we got a little bit of savings there. Under 81, the next two professional services are community activities and professional services. It has to do with the rec program. So we had some savings from the concerts in the park not happening, and contracting with recreation instructors. We've got less recreation. They're online, but we still have less participants. So we'll be paying out less to contract recreation instructors. We are working on rolling out a tent, setting up a tent and having some outdoor under a tent recreation programs that be back behind the community center in the fall and winter. So should be constructing that in the next couple weeks. So we will still have some semblance of a recreation program, nothing to the extent that we have had traditionally. And then we have an operating contingency in our general fund budget of $250,000 just in case, and I'm lowering it to $150,000. So $100,000 savings there. All in the department line items are about $2.1 million. Okay, the economic stability reserve. So we had used 935 of that last year. We replenished it. And as we're balancing this year's budget, I'm recommending that we use just under half of it to help balance out the rest of the budget. I list here a summary of general fund reserve policy number 233. I don't necessarily have to run through it, but it does have the reserve percentages and amounts. The idea in the reserve policy, though, is, again, like I mentioned back, I think on slide 1, that when we take action to utilize our reserves, that we look at them not as only available for this one event, that we need to kind of protect some of our powder here in case something else happens. So This slide kind of just speaks to, yes, I'm recommending that we utilize almost half of the economic stability reserve in FY21. It talks here about how those reserves are set. Reminder on this slide and the next that we still have, in between us and not being able to write checks, an extreme event reserve fully funded. We have an unassigned fund balance that is fully funded. Some of that is for cash flow. Probably a little less than 2 million is just for cash flow because we don't get our revenues in at the same time we're always paying our bills. But we've got that. And the last bullet really on slide 11 talks you shouldn't use more than half. And we've got basically 6 months to come up with a plan to work on replenishing it. And that's right around the time when we're working on our FY 22-23 budget. So this issue will not go away. It will have to be solved. I did want to show you on slide 12, just so you have some idea of, kind of all the pots of money that aren't restricted by law that the council can take action to tap. Again, the economic stability reserve would still be at 2.2 million. The unassigned fund balance, 2.8, roughly 1.6 of that's needed for cash flow. We've got the Section 115 unfunded liability trust, and I'm not going to read through all of them, but when you add up all these funds that we have cash that the council could utilize to deal with things, we've got $19 million sitting there. And what I always like to point out is we've got $1 insurance coverage on everything from trips and falls to accidents and everything else. Very low deductibles, if you will. And I'm not recommending at this point that we utilize any of these. I'm just pointing out that, yeah, we got a big problem ahead of us, but we're in pretty good shape to deal with big problems. Risks. So the last slide, lucky slide 13. Risks as I see them, and I put other on here because I'm sure every one of us could probably come up with something different or additional. A COVID surge in the fall. It's been predicted by a lot of folks when flu season hits that COVID's going to rear its ugly head, and again, impacts on travel tourism. State and county guidance for businesses that come out, and reactions from the government and changing what industry's allowed to do or not do. That concerns me. It's a risk because we've already seen it happening. Overreactions and underreactions alike. Development and construction dramatically slowing because it is supporting quite a bit of our revenues right now. Legal matters. I put this on here because we could have a legal issue that could run up a tab. And again, anything else. I don't know if anybody else wants to throw something on this list. Please feel free to do so. But really, it's our hospitality industry is what worries me the most. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we're coming back later in the year and doing better, and I wouldn't be surprised if we come back later in the year and we're doing worse. So this is what I've got at this point in time is what's before you. Next steps, any input the committee has, I would add that into the council presentation on September 1st. Plan on bringing budget adjustments to the council for the council to consider on the 15th of September. Providing regular updates as we progress through the year, and again preparing the next 2 years budgets rolling into next spring. That also includes a plan to replenish our reserves. So with that, I'm open for questions, comments, discussion.
Any committee members that have any comments?
Yes, Madam Chair. I have a couple. So I guess I'll ask you, Mr. Kilbrew, but of course this is for everyone. If there's any thoughts or open it up to discussion. But the first thing I wanted to ask you about was the sheriff's contract. This is just a question. I don't know the answer to this. I read today that the Board of Supervisors is cutting their funding for the sheriff even further. So if that's true, if I understand that, would that be anything of interest to us? Can we renegotiate, or what would that mean for us if they are giving them less money, or would that be worse for us?
I guess it all depends. If they're cutting funding for overhead that we help pay, and their overhead costs go down, good for us.
Okay. I read it in the paper and I don't have the details of it.
Yeah, you'll see, like, if there's departmental allocations that we pay for every badge that we buy, there's a markup that pays for the department administration, if you will. If they reduce the administration, then the allocation per badge goes down and helps us. But I don't know what they're proposing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the details of it. I just wanted to ask that question while you're here. But the second one, I really I had this thought while I was sitting up here on the dais, so I know it's a little dangerous and it's not really thought out very well, but that's why I was hoping maybe there's some discussion. But you had mentioned waiving our policy regarding funding the CIP fund with the excess money that we had. And also this goes to our economic stability reserve as well. If we're going to be doing that, do we have a plan, a contingency plan? And what I mean by that is looking at the California budget, I know that they made contingencies for if the federal government comes through with the state and local aid. And, while we're doing this, I notice we don't have anything in there. We are going forward assuming we're not going to get anything from the federal government. So, and I'm not trying to make your job harder. I don't know if this is wise to do, but have a contingency if some of that, if any aid does come through. And I think you were not going to present this at the next city council as something we were going to take action on and adopt or make any changes to the budget. But I know the state set a deadline of October 15th for that aid to come through, and then they would some of the things they would fix their budget when that came through. So, do you have an idea when we might be taking action on this, or if that's something that is wise to put in their contingency plan? And like I said, it's an unformed thought. I just wanted to throw it out there and see what anybody might think of that.
I think it's a great thought. If you look on slide 3, the council's directives to us on the bottom of that slide, what do you do if, look to replenish reserves, cover the next couple of years, replenish that pension liability account, the community investment account. You could throw some other things on that list. When you look through the department slide cuts, whether or not you want to put some of that back in. When you look at slides 4 and 5 in particular, personnel costs and, cuts to the budgets, you could look to replenish those. I think we've already kind of got the game plan lined out for us here, that if something good happens, we've got where that contingency money would go. I think the state did it really more just to put pressure that if they happen to get that relief, it's going to go to the schools. But what they didn't say was they didn't cut other things, they cut schools. So I think that was a redirection of where the discussion should have taken place. But if we have hopes and dreams money comes in, you can say whatever you want to do with it. But I think the council already took action to tell us what we should be looking at.
Mike?
So, Mike, I was interested because last time we met, we solved our our net difference, basically 2-to-1 reserves versus expenditures, right? Pretty close to 2-to-1. And I think we were talking if there was some sort of special ratio, and it looks like you dropped it to almost 1.3-to-1, which I think is great. Obviously, I think we want to utilize the least amount of reserves as possible. So I think that's a lot better than last year, dropping that. Conceptually, why? I understand it's probably easier to waive, what is it, 233 or the unassigned, whichever the one that says we're going to move any sort of excess profit over. And why, again, can we not just move that over, meet that objective, and then solve for it through another one of our reserve accounts? Because I'd generally probably like to not waive one right at, what was that, 2 years ago they came up with those?
Well, there was discussion about this, that it forces a decision to be made to actually waive it. So it was part of it. It wasn't thought it's a bad thing to waive it, but that there had to be an actual action to do something that wasn't in line with the policy. I'm balancing all the policies. The other one says don't spend more than half of a reserve in any 1 year. So I've got the economic stability reserve at spending less than half of it. We could obviously tap, I mean, it's up to the council or whatever this committee wants to recommend. If we wanted to tap other accounts that aren't those reserves, the community investment, community investment account and the section 115, those are accounts. The real general fund reserves are economic stability and extreme event and unassigned fund balance. You could go any way you want to go here. I just thought the best way to go was to actually use the economic stability reserve to the extent we could per policy, because that's what it's for. So we could tap it more and go another 1.3 million and draw it down to 900,000. And we might be back later this year or next year saying, can we have that money back from the community investment account? If it turns out that we finish the year better and everything's sunny, the bottom line in the general fund, if there's excess fund balance, it goes to the community investment account. So, just trying to balance everything against everything else. This just seemed like the best approach by.
Got it. I agree. It's all the same at the end of the day. I wasn't sure. And perhaps I need to go read 233 again, just for detail. But thanks. And then I like the fact that you were able to, I guess, carve out more savings relative to last year.
And we did predict that because we only had 3 months dealing with it in FY20 because it hit us in March. Everything started shutting down. Everybody's trying to figure everything out. This time we had more time to plan. We started adjusting some of the operations back in May and we're continuing them. So we get a whole year out of it. Thank you for giving us credit for doing better, but I think it was just by the nature of having 12 months to deal with it instead of 3.
Madam Chair, thank you. To Mayor Vicsorik's point on the plan ahead, I agree with you that we do need a plan, but I'm comfortable with the one that we kind of have for now. But I think we should agree that when we do the mid-year budget review, or at some point if we start seeing some windfalls or the curve coming up faster than we thought, we should come back in here, review that, and say, hey, I love the idea that we're going to make the reserves whole again first, but maybe we do need to balance that with employee raises so I think we should come back here and revisit that here as soon as we get a sense that things might be going well, but to not jinx ourselves, let's just stick with the policies for me for now. I am in favor of the not sweeping the general unfunded liability or the unassigned fund balance to the community investment account for now. The reality is I think we're going to go right back to wanting to dip into it anyway. We used $1 million of it to solve for last year's budget. And I just don't see a scenario where we're probably not going to want to dip into it. So the beauty of our policies is that if we don't need it at the end of next year, by policy, it automatically sweeps back in there anyway. So that's, for me, I'm okay with that. It's one less shell in the shell game movement for now, I think. Without putting you on the spot, Mr. City Manager, it's not lost on me that the employees are contributing a heavy share of this. Not only are they foregoing raises this year, but they are also all doing more. Because all those line items come with explanations about more work by in-house staff sharing. We need to know, and certainly the city council needs to know at some point that's affecting morale. I appreciate the contribution and the dedication of all of our staff, and I get a sense that for now that they're proud to be on a winning team, which this certainly is, and they're realistic about the fact that, I mean, it's a tough year, but we need to know at what point we need to do something about it. So I'll just tell you now publicly, while almost all the department heads are in the room, if it gets to a point where things are breaking, we need to know. There might not be anything we can do, but there might be something. So I want to kind of call out great work that Mike did, and on slide 5 at the top, our own policies say that our reserve funds are set at percentages of operating revenue, and it is a very fiscally responsible interpretation of those for Mike to set those reserves at what would be a normal FY21 budget, not the reduced budget, because he could very easily have cheated this equation and reduced all those reserve funds by 25%, almost 25%, 20%, whatever it is, because it is going to be a lower than expected revenue year. But he's not doing that, which is harder, makes it harder now to solve for, but it's the right thing to do because we're going to want those reserves when things do get back to normal. So making things harder for himself, for all, to solve this by doing the right thing. So thank you for doing that, and I endorse it completely. And then we talk about balance and, balancing use of funds and savings of money. I really do think this is very well balanced. Basically using $2 million ish out of reserves, $2 million out of line item reductions, 760 out of personnel costs. It really is a pretty balanced solution. I think the only real subjective idea here for us is, how do we want to prioritize which reserves we use? And I'm fine with the ones that you're doing, and I'm comfortable with how things are going to look going forward. And Mike and I had this conversation offline, but as far as risks go, I am also confident that we still have levers if things get worse. Even if it's not COVID, if some other, we have a huge inflation influx next year, or a housing market crash or something else, I'm pretty confident that we still have a lot of levers. It's not like this is our last ditch effort and we're using all of our options up. So I'm pretty confident with this going forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. So staff is asking for a recommendation for us to approve this today. There were just a few things that the committee had mentioned. Vice Chair Jamie, you wanted some additional explanation on slide 4 regarding the delta. So if we could get that added in there. And then I believe I forget, I don't know who wrote or who asked for clarification on the replenish policies. So if we could get something, a bullet point in there on that, that would be great. And then the removal of the Lantern District impact fee was also something that was mentioned that you wanted. You had said that.
I just mentioned that when the money comes in, it flows directly over to the capital fund anyway by council policy. So I wanted to take it out as if it would make the bottom line for the general fund look better. I took it out $250,000.
Okay.
So we solved for what I think is a truer picture of our general fund problem.
Okay. Okay. So then with just the addition of the explanation on slide 4 and then the clarification of the replenish policy, I would make a motion to approve this staff report. Is there a second?
Second.
Call for a vote?
Okay. Member Frost,
Aye.
Member Killebrew,
Aye.
Member Vixoric,
Aye.
Member Federico,
Aye.
Chair Orlando.
Aye.
By consensus, this motion passes 5-0.
That was a really great report, Mike. Thank you. Are there any other staff reports this evening?
Yes, I'd like to provide a quick update. We did close the Community Facilities District bond refinancing, I believe August 19th. And we kind of hit a sweet spot in the market. Better to be lucky than good sometimes. Our initial numbers we ran on the refinancing, I'm a little bit blank, too many numbers in my head, but I think we were north of maybe 3.4 million in projected net present value savings. We rocketed up and actually achieved a little over 8 million on the day that they sold the bonds, which allowed us to, we had projected taking 2 years off of the term of the bonds, dropping it from 2045 to 2043. We're now down to a final maturity in 2041, and it's a small maturity. So we took 4 years off of the bond term. So really successful. I want to thank Robin for all of her work on this, shepherding and working with the finance team. But again, it's just one of those things you wake up in the morning and, you know, they start pricing. We did a pre-pricing the day before and it was looking really good, like north of 7 net present value. And on the day we sold them, I was in 2 Zoom meetings that morning, but watching the actual bond sales and, you know, getting oversubscribed on different maturities. It was crazy. I never seen anything like it. It was so good that afternoon I pulled the trigger on refinancing my house. So it was a good day. That's all I have to report.
Great. Any other reports? Are there any financial review committee members reporting this evening? Okay. Then we should have our next regular meeting for the Financial Review Committee on October 27th at 2020 at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Meeting is adjourned.